All right, I think we should go ahead and get started. We're just so excited to have everyone here today. Good afternoon. This is Christina Kasperzak with the Early Childhood TA Center, and Grace Kelly and Barbara Smith with ECTA are going to be presenting with me today, and we're going to do some breakouts later in the conversation. So we have a number of other TA staff joining who are going to help facilitate those discussions. So we're going to get started with our webinar on what's in your toolbox. We know that a critical part of your work as coordinators and leaders in Part C and 619, a critical part of your work is leading systems improvement. So we're really excited to have this opportunity to talk with you about the skills and resources and strategies that support your efforts. So a couple of quick tips on the technology. You are able to mute or unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone buttons at the bottom of your Zoom window. Of course, we ask that you be mindful about any background noise in your location, but we're going to definitely do some small group discussions and encourage you to participate. You can also see other participants if you decide you want to click on the participant buttons at the bottom of the Zoom window, so you can see others who are here and participating in the meeting today. And you can also use and see the chat feature. So you have to go down to the bottom of your screen and click on that little bubble that's the chat button, and you can expand that window if you'd like to participate more by chat. So with that, the purposes for today are first to review some of the key skills and habits of systems thinking and how those skills are important for helping you lead systems improvement in early intervention and preschool special education. We're hoping this is kind of an opportunity to reflect on your individual strengths and possibly ways that or areas where you would like to improve your skills related to systems thinking and leading systems change. And we want to begin to explore some resources that ECTA has specifically designed some resources to support states with coordinating and leading systems improvement work. So we're going to explore a few resources today, and we'll do more on the next call as well. So we hope you have March 7th marked on your calendars. Both today and March 7th are from 3 to 4 Eastern time. Our basic agenda today after this overview is really digging in a little bit on some of the foundations of systems improvement. So looking at some critical concepts and definitions. As I said, we want to highlight some resources that were created to support your work around systems improvement. Some of them you might be more or less familiar with. So we're thinking you might want to explore some of them in more depth if you know them a little bit, and others, if it's new to you, you might want to look into more to figure out if that's a tool that would be useful to you. The second half of our call today, we're going to move into some small group breakouts because we think that engaging in a little bit of discussion and networking across folks across the country in similar positions will help you think more about the systems thinking and systems improvement work that you do. And we certainly want to come back together and not only share highlights, but also think about how we can help you more in the next call as well. And keep in mind, you know, ECTA staff are resources to you on an individual basis. So if this webinar prompts you to think about some individual needs that you have and the ways that we could support you in your current work, we hope that you will reach out to us and make sure we know how to support you. So with that, I just want to jump into, there are a lot of concepts or terms that we talk about in systems improvement work. So what we want to do today is look at some of those terms and think about what they mean, and then how do they fit in special ed work, birth to 5, and how do they fit and support you in your work. So we want to look at what is a system, what are characteristics of a system, what do we actually mean by systems thinking, and what does it mean to lead systems improvement efforts? What's the difference between leading and managing? Because of the nature of your work in early intervention, preschool special ed, we want to think about what do we mean by the larger early childhood system? what does systems thinking look like specifically for us in Part C and 619? How do we know what good systems thinking practices are, and what are other kinds of skills that, that we need or we can improve in ourselves so that we're better at leading systems improvement? So we're going to go through some of these terms and think about how they apply to our work. The definitions, I'm going to start with just some really basic definitions. What do we mean by a skill and a practice and systems thinking? So really kind of definite dictionary definition, a skill is really the ability to use one's knowledge effectively and readily in performance. So it's your ability to do something well, and then in practice, it's the actual application or use of an idea or belief. So it's the performance, it's actually exercising that skill in order to improve or maintain proficiency. And then when we are going to be talking about systems, we're going to look at a system as sort of this regularly interacting or interdependent group of items in forming a unified whole. So systems thinking is then the set of skills that are used to improve your capability of identifying and understanding systems. So using systems thinking skills, you can understand systems, you can think about how do you predict the way a system will behave, you can think about how you make a modification to produce the desired effects, how you make a modification and how it affects other pieces of the system. So all of that are important sort of basic definitions around skills, practices, systems, and systems thinking. And some of the characteristics of a system, just again, as some foundational information, when you think about a system, you might think about components or subcomponents within the system. It's usually part of this larger system with interacting pieces. So it interacts with other systems and it has subsystems within it. And the interconnectedness of the system parts are really essential. So when we're thinking about, it's when those components are functioning well together that you actually are accomplishing the optimal results of the system. Finally, I just wanted to mention this concept of loosely coupled systems. So you can see how some systems, and in this definitions like health and education and human services, they're not tightly coupled, but basically they can be aligned and connected to build coherence across systems for a greater purpose. And we certainly see that in our Part C early intervention work and our 619 preschool in terms of thinking across the subsystems that are really important for supporting children and families. So those are just some introductory definitions, and I'm going to turn it right over to Grace to talk a little bit more about systems for C and 619.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm looking forward to this conversation and glad that you all have joined us. And as Christina has outlined, we have some definitions that we're going to use. And so for the next couple of slides, we're going to apply those definitions to the systems that we work in. So as we stated, for Part C and 619, a system is a set of interacting and interdependent components. So the overall purpose of the system is achieved through the actions and interactions of its components. So you're really looking at how the system works within itself and then how it works within the systems around it. Early intervention in 619, by their design, are considered complex adaptive systems. They're complex because they're diverse and composed of multiple interconnected elements, and they're adaptive because they have the capacity to change and learn from experience. And we know that, all of us know this on the phone, that we do work in a very complex system. We manage multiple partners and funding streams. We look at different priorities, both horizontally and vertically within the systems we work in. And we know that leading and managing this takes certain skills and habits that are unique to the program that we worked in. Something that's important is understanding how this all works together and the role that you all play as coordinators and staff to help everything work more effectively. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. One of the things when we think about systems improvement, it aims to bring about lasting change by altering the underlying structures and the mechanisms which make a system operate in a particular way. And these can include policies, routines, relationships, resources, the power structures, and the values. And what's interesting in thinking about this, while we're thinking particularly about the early childhood system in Part C and 619, all systems work in the same way and have some commonalities. So whatever system you're thinking about, mechanical systems, electrical systems, they all have some commonalities among them. And I think all of us know this too, that systems change and system improvement is a journey. So it's a journey that we go on. One of the things that to think about is that I think sometimes we can be overwhelmed by the idea of systems improvement and see it as this huge, huge undertaking that we have to do. But there can be simple but significant changes that we make that improve a system, such as updating policies and procedures, looking at building an electronic IFSP or IEP. While those take a lot of work, they're very concrete things that we can do, to those more complex tasks that we have, implementing and scaling up evidence-based practices, partnering with community initiatives or other agencies to develop better programs for the children we serve, doing statewide inclusion practices in pre-K programs. So there are small but significant changes. There are also other complex changes that we make. And one of the things that we want to think about is that what leads to systems improvement is that while you might make a small or a large change, you're thinking ahead to what that means within your program, within the larger agency within you sit, and then across the early care and education system. So these changes cause ripple effects across the various places that we work. We want to talk for a few seconds about going from a very big picture to a big picture system to the system that we all work in, which is Part C and 619. And I want to share this with you to think about the ecological view of the system, and this examines how policy and infrastructure support and influence service delivery. And you can see at the heart of this, and you'll see this throughout our work, is that children and families are at the heart of the work that we do. But as you look at this, you can see that there's a local program, state and federal, national, and each one of those you have multiple programs and policies and procedures that define and shape what the system, the broader system looks like, and towards a common goal, which is serving children and families. In our work and in our thinking, we have to continually step back and look at how we align across these varying levels. So at each level, there's an infrastructure in place, and that includes all of these components, and how do we look at that and see that those fit together and align to better serve children and families. And then if we take it down to the next level, I know many of you have seen this before, but this is looking at what a comprehensive early care and education system might look like. And if you look at the blue, I'm pointing at it, but if you look at the blue oval, you see early learning and development. Then we have health, family leadership and support in the green. each of these components, so if you just think about early learning and development as a component, this is a system within a system. For instance, this component focuses on early learning opportunities for children to support lifelong learning. So within that subsystem, you have the subsystem of childcare, preschool programs, early Head Start, family literacy programs, and each of those subsystems need to operate effectively within that system, but then also interact with health and family leadership and support, again, with the outcome of having thriving children and families. An example earlier when Christina gave the definitions of systems and subsystems, so you can see within early learning and development, you may have a subsystem. Within health, you may have a subsystem of WIC, food stamps, depending on your health department or your health systems. You have various health-related programs and activities within that. And an example of loosely coupled would be thinking of the health department or the education department and the multiple programs within that, and they each have their own funding stream. There are eligibility for programs, a definition of the children and families that they serve. And our work is to align all of these systems, because when they are working well within the circle, within early learning and development, and then across health and family leadership and support, when those all function well, there are good outcomes for children and families. Another way of thinking about it is that being loosely coupled means that they have, when a significant change is made within the health circle, say that WIC make some changes, that may change within that program. It may impact how we serve children and families, but it doesn't throw the system as a whole off center. So that idea of loosely coupled is what that means. And what we are constantly striving towards is to have all of that working together. However, as we know, that is our work. It isn't likely that that will always align specifically as we would like to see it, but that's what we're working towards on a daily basis. And you can see on the outside, those are the common functions of each of those systems. So define and coordinate leadership, have a strong finance system in place, align standards, create and support improvement strategies, and ensure accountability. So those are two different views and two different ways of thinking about systems. So systems thinking is a perspective of seeing and understand systems as whole rather than a collection of parts. The whole is a web of interconnections that create emerging patterns. So that is a picture of a spider web, and it gives that idea of how all of this fits together, and it takes the ability to step back and look at the big picture. So a systems thinker steps back and sees the forest rather than the details of any one tree. So I think we have roles and practices that we look at when you're systems thinking, which is recognizing that we have complex interconnected systems and the components that make up that system, that we step back and look for the big picture. You also want to be able to look at things from many different perspectives. So that means stepping back and thinking about how different people may view the system and how the programs within that system, the perspectives that they have. You think through the short-term and the long-term impacts of your actions, and it means that you invest time in order to make informed decisions rather than acting quickly. So earlier when we talked about making decisions and moving forward, sometimes, and how one small change may cause a ripple through the system, it's sometimes thinking back and thinking through the decisions that we make and how that impacts directly or indirectly different aspects of the system. And this can help us in viewing it, those sort of habits and those skills can help us from thinking of a broad perspective of looking overall structures patterns and cycles to improve programs and practices. So we're looking at policies and procedures. We're looking at emerging trends at the federal level. So we're looking at all of that and how that impacts us. One of the things that we wanted to point out and to think about is the difference between leading and managing. So again, this is from the Harvard Business Review. And there are lots of definitions out there about this, but leading refers to an individual ability to influence, motivate, and enable others to contribute towards organizational success. It's that ability to have others follow you and believe in the vision and mission that you're putting forward. And managing is the process of dealing with or controlling things or people. So it's that managing the process, or it's the details of making something happen. Another skill that we have to have when we're leading systems improvement, and this is from Michael Fullen's work, who has done quite a bit of work in looking at leading in a culture of change. He's done a lot of work around systems improvement, particularly in school settings, but I think it applies to our work as well. But for us to lead systems improvement, we have to have a making a difference sense of purpose. People have to understand why this will make a difference. We have to have strategies that mobilize people to tackle tough problems, not through problems, to tackle tough problems and have the solutions that they need to sort of stay the course. We have to have clear indicators of success. And we have to be able to appeal to people's commitment and to help them see why they have a strong role and a part in helping to lead this improvement and be a part of it. Some of the habits that we need to have for leading systems improvement, and I think we've addressed this through the definitions and some of the previous slides that we've just talked about, is that you have to understand organizational management and how it works. We have to be willing to test assumptions. So believing that something is the way it is, because it's been done that way in the past, we have to test those sorts of assumptions and see if they still work. And if not, develop new ways of addressing problems and issues. We have to change and understand different people's perspectives and be willing to look at it from all different avenues and different ways before we move on. And of course, as the person leading systems improvement, and I've heard many people say this as we've done work over the years, is that you are the one that has to keep calm and carry on and keep everybody moving forward. So to be a leader, you have to be a systems thinker, and you have to be willing to promote systems change for continuous improvement. And you have to take on various roles and take on that role of being a systems coach. So with that, and I know we went through that very quickly, and we're hoping in the small groups that you have additional time to think through some of this, and to have conversations about your thoughts about what we just presented. I'm going to turn it over to Barbara, who is going to talk about some of the tools that ECTA has developed to help you in your work with this.
Hey everybody, it's Barbara Smith. I'm so glad you joined us today. So now we want to talk about 3 particular tools that ECTA has developed over the last few years that are here to support you in your leadership roles in systems improvement. The 3 tools, and then we're going to touch on each one briefly, and then we're going to touch on them, and then we're going to spend more time on them in the March webinar. But the 3 tools with their links to the website is the system framework, which is a large body of resources and tools on the website for you as leaders to not only use, but to help other people understand the whole system and the work that's necessary to move all the various components and improve all the various components for child and family outcomes. The third one is the online guide to the implementation process. I'm sure all of you now are well versed in implementation science. We do know that, thank goodness for that body of work, that there are stages that we go through when we're changing policies, practice, and systems. And particularly when we're focused on implementing evidence-based practices at the child and family level, that there are certain drivers that they are referred to as drivers, but certain behaviors that have to be engaged in. There are certain stages and timelines in order to implement those practices with fidelity and take the data to make sure we're getting the outcomes that we want. The online guide on ECTA to the implementation process takes all of those theoretical concepts and approaches and contextualizes them within early childhood and the 619 and Part C world. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. The statewide implementation guide is a hands-on, almost plug and play that takes the components, the systems thinking, the implementation process, and has it as an online self-guided tool for you to use with the goal of implementing evidence-based practices at the child and family level and scaling it up statewide. So let's look at each of these individually. The systems framework, as I said, is quite a body of resources on the website. It was put together by ECTA with a lot of input from the field and from stakeholders. And as you can see, the systems framework attempts to answer the question that's on this slide. What does a state need to put into place to support implementation of effective practices? And so what we want to look at is starting from the right and moving to the left. We all have the desired outcome of positive outcomes for children with disabilities and their families. That's what we're working towards. And all your systems improvement efforts really have that as our focus, because that's what we're all about. And we know that in order to promote positive outcomes for children with disabilities and families, we have to make sure that evidence-based practices are being used at the local and program and community level with children and families. So we've got to make sure that people are using evidence-based practices in order to be sure that we're getting those positive outcomes. The system frame, hold on one second, go back. Thank you. The system framework then is that figure on the far left that takes the system that we want, that we have in place, our 619, our Part C system, our early childhood education system, and then it defines those components. Remember, it's the working parts, it's those interconnected parts that Christina and Grace talked about that makes it a system, and those interconnected parts are governance, finance, our personnel or workforce, our data systems, accountability and quality improvement, and quality standards. So those are the components that we have to look at, each one of those, and pull them together as a whole to make sure we have a quality system that can, in fact, support the implementation of evidence-based practices, which will result in positive outcomes for children with disabilities and their families. Next slide, Grace. In the development of the system framework, the stakeholders that assisted ECTA and the ECTA staff identified cross-cutting themes across those various components of an effective, high-quality system. And those themes are engaging stakeholders, no matter what component of the system you're looking at, whether it's data, whether it's finance, governance, personnel. We're going to engage stakeholders to make sure we have all the good ideas, establishing and revising policies related to that component, promoting collaboration related to that component. Using data for improvement, communicating effectively with all stakeholders, building family leadership and support to guide our work, and coordinating or integrating across the broader early childhood service sector. So those cross-cutting themes you will see in the system framework in all of the components. Next slide. The second tool is the online implementation process guide that's on the ECTA website. And as I said, it takes implementation science concepts and embeds it into early childhood and C and 619 contexts. Excuse me. It describes all the stages and steps. I have found it really helpful with teams at the state level so that they can help others understand that our systems change and systems improvement efforts are going to take time, and they're going to move through, not linearly, but they are going to move through stages, initial implementation, everything all the way to when we can scale the practices up statewide. So we're going to go through stages, and we're going to have steps within those stages, and it's going to take time. And there are state and local self-assessments within that guide that you can look at where you are within those stages and steps of implementation. Our third tool is the statewide implementation guide. It's a guide to use at the state level to implement evidence-based practices at the child and family level. So we look at the child and family level, we look at the practices we want to implement, and we backtrack to what do we have to do at the state to support the implementation of those practices at the local level. It's for state level decision makers, in whatever your effort is for implementing evidence-based practices, whether it's your state systemic improvement plan, whether it's preschool inclusion, whatever it is that you're trying to promote better outcomes for children and families, you can use this implementation guide. It provides a process for looking at what the state needs to do to ensure local adoption of evidence-based practices. So what are the key support structures that are going to need in place at the state level, and how do you put those in place? The guide also has a whole section on data, recommended data to use at the local program level, data to use at the state level, and then helping state level decision makers decide what local level data needs to be rolled up to the state level. All of this guide and the resources come from our work implementing the DEC recommended practices in states and the pyramid model in over 25 states. So in our work over the last 15 years, we have honed all of this down, next slide please, to what we think are the 4 essential support structures that the state needs to have in order to ensure that evidence-based practices are in fact being implemented at the local level and that you're getting the child and family outcomes that you want. A state leadership team, and that's a cross-agency state leadership team, because our children and families are in all kinds of service networks. The state leadership team creates a professional development network of external program coaches. Those are people that might be regionally based. Their work is to coach programs in implementing those evidence-based practices. And they work with those implementation and demonstration sites that also have a leadership team. And the program coach coaches that team in implementing the practices. And then there's a whole data and evaluation system that the program uses to make sure they're implementing the practices with fidelity and getting the outcomes they want, and then what data the state needs in order to continue to support and scale up. All of those 4 essential structures are broken down into the 4 stages of implementation. So what does the state leadership team need to do in exploration and planning, installation, implementation, and scale up? The same with the program coaches, the local sites, and what does the data and evaluation look like depending on what stage of implementation there is. So that's very quick. We're going to go into more information and use of these resources in March, and pulling it all together. This slide and the next shows that you select your outcomes, your practices, you improve your system and your system components, you use the implementation process, the stages, the drivers, and the teams, and the statewide implementation guide provides a structure and a process for looking across all of these items. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Grace.
Thanks, Barbara. I think we're going to quickly move into some small groups. We'll have about 15 minutes in our small groups, and it's going to happen automatically. So participants, you should not have to do anything, but soon you'll be moved. I think it might prompt you to accept that you'll be moved into the small group and participate in some discussion, and then we'll regroup right at the end for about 5 minutes. Great, I think we're back in the whole group, and I'm just looking to see if Grace, were you gonna lead us in this next part?
So for those of you who may have been cut off by the countdown that was there, I know somebody in our group got cut off. Please send us your ideas that you were talking about, and sorry for that. We had somebody who was trying to convey an idea and 15 seconds left, so I'm sure that happened in other groups as well. So send us your ideas. So what we wanted to do real quickly is, I know that was a quick conversation as we talked about. We hope to have much longer conversations in the small group for the next round. But what is one big idea from each small group? And if you wouldn't mind somebody just randomly sharing that, that would be good. And if you have additional ideas, put them in the chat.
Grace, I'll just jump in. Our group talked about characteristics of someone who's really good at leading systems improvement. And there were things like being neutral and helping people see where you're going, and role release and making people feel like you're in it together. And then there was this great idea that one person had about keeping your sense of humor, because it's a difficult process.
Yeah, definitely. Other big ideas?
Grace, I can chime in from our group. One of our participants mentioned that the importance of understanding that the work needs to be ongoing. A commitment to that is really important for people who are leading these efforts, and that's often a struggle, because every time you reach a level of achievement that you've achieved a result, people want to put it down and move on to something else. But so what can we do to keep the concept of continuous improvement in place is something that would be helpful to explore further.
Thank you. Any other big ideas?
Grace, this is Sherry, and because of time, we decided to focus our time on ideas for our next webinar. And I think one of the ideas that our team talked about was when you're implementing systems change or systems improvement initiatives, sometimes the task can be very large. You have multiple cross-sector agencies and lots of different ideas, and how do you sort of chunk that in a way that it is manageable, so that you have a strategic way in terms of thinking about how to move forward with systems improvement initiative. And so that was just one thing that came out.
Interesting. Yeah. Any other big ideas? Have we heard from everybody?
And this is Kellen. So in our group,
Okay.
we can share a big idea that we had similar to Sherry, and that was maybe looking at examples of someone or states that have taken a small improvement effort and scaled it up in the systems, the bigger system picture, and then how that lessons learned, how that process went, that kind of thing.
Great idea. And we hope that if you have additional ideas that were discussed in your group, if you don't mind putting those in the chat, and again, making sure to email any one of us so that we can use that in planning our next call, which is in 2 weeks, I think. So one of the things that we know that you just don't want to participate in a webinar because that doesn't help you develop skills. So we want to offer an extended learning opportunity before the next call and sort of offer that you might review at least one of the 3 tools that we discussed and how this and think through how this resource supports your systems improvement work. So that will be part of the conversation that we have on our next call. So just look at one of them, and it may be one that you've used or one that you haven't used that you want to sort of look at and know a little bit more about and how it might support your work. And then think about what new ideas you have about the skills needed to support your ongoing work. So over the next couple of weeks, this might be in the back of your head, and think about skills that you see in other people or skills that you think might support your work as you move into the next phase of some systems improvement activities or ideas that you have. Christina, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up, to end this.
Yeah, we're actually
Take any other questions?
we're just actually a minute over time, and I just want to say thank you to everyone. We had a great small group discussion, although not long enough. So we look forward to talking about some skill building and resources around systems thinking and systems improvement next time. So we'll be in touch by email, and we hope that you'll share with us anything by email as well if there's things you'd really like us to make sure we cover next time. I'll just say thank you. I hope everyone has a terrific afternoon, and we look forward to talking with you more about this topic.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.